We'd like to talk for a while about how the identity of Hindu people is formed. Family is the most important aspect of the life of Hindu people. And of course, this means generally the extended family, not the nuclear family. The one you see here is a Bollywood family, of course. We're going to use a simple diagram to try to help us understand what this really means for Hindu people. But family is the very center of Hindu identity. Traditional Hindus live for the prosperity and security of the family as a whole, rather than seeing the family as existing to empower their individual success the way we tend to see it in the West. Tim Schultz talks about this much in his book, Disciple Making Among Hindus. This is a major difference, of course, between Indian and Western culture that affects all we do as communicators. Geert Hofstadter, and pardon my bad Dutch, has researched and written extensively on culture. Others have as well, of course. It'd be helpful to hear some of his Hofstadter insights, and I recommend looking at that online when you're able to. He has lots of helpful information from his country comparisons, and for a few minutes we'll talk about country comparison of individualism, collectivism, and power distance. Individualism. The fundamental issue addressed by this dimension is the degree of interdependence a society maintains among its members. It has to do with whether people see themselves as an I or as we. What is their self-image? In individualistic societies, of course, people are only supposed to look after themselves. That's what they tend to do. That's what they think life is about, generally. Sometimes even including their direct family. But it's very much about me, myself, and I. In collectivist societies, people belong to various in-groups that take care of them in exchange for unquestioning loyalty. Something very important to keep in mind. Now we want to speak for a moment about power distance. This dimension deals with the fact that all individuals in societies are not equal, and it expresses the attitude of the culture toward these power inequalities amongst us, or amongst its people. Power distance is defined as the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. It has to do with the fact that a society's inequality is endorsed by the followers as much as by the leaders. India scores high on the dimension of power distance, for hierarchy and a top-down structure in society are greatly appreciated. Generally, there's an acceptance of unequal rights between the power-privileged and those who are lesser down in the pecking order. Communication is top-down, generally, and directive in its style. And often, feedback which is negative is never even offered. Now, India has a rather intermediate score of 48 in these insights on the scale, but it's a society with both collectivistic and individualistic traits. The collectivist side means that there's a high preference for belonging to a larger social framework in which individuals are expected to act in accordance to the greater good of one's defined in-group or groups. So for a collectivist, and you can read about this in other places as well, for a collectivist to be rejected by one's peers or to be thought lowly of by one's extended and immediate in-groups leaves him or her rudderless and with a sense of intense emptiness. Relationships are the key to everything in collectivist societies. If you have not done any reading on this topic, I strongly encourage you to do so. Another important aspect of family, as we look at culture, is the idea of dominant family dyads. A family dyad is the characteristic relationship between two specific individuals within a family. And if you're observant, you don't need to live long in Hindu society to notice the things that I'm about to describe. But we do wish to give credit to the following source, and you can see that there on the slide. The dominant family dyad in the West is husband and wife, of course. The husband-wife dyad is defined by individual decision and exclusiveness. The nuclear family usually starts with the husband-wife dyad taking residence apart from both families of origin. The husband is more loyal to his wife than to his mother. The dominant family dyad in Hindu culture is mother-son. The Indian mother-son dyad is defined by dependence and by inclusiveness. One mother even with multiple sons. In traditional Hindu families, patrilineal Hindu families, where married sons continue to live in a joint family structure within their parents, with brothers, sisters, some of them, mothers often prepare food for their grown married sons for the lifetime. The husband is more loyal to his mother than to his wife. Family is defined by caste and ethnicity. Caste is the English word and comes from the Portuguese, casta, meaning race, kind, or breed. The Hindi word jati is an essential one to know. Basically, it has the same meaning as caste, our English word caste. Race, kind, or breed. Each caste or jati is best thought of as a distinct people group with a distinct ethno-linguistic and ethno-geographic heritage. Now, the word community is by far the preferred English word for jati, especially among Hindu people living in the West. Where I live in Europe, local high schools are the venues for the festival of Navratri, 9 nights of dancing, worship, and socializing. The Hindu people say, our community does Navratri in this high school. Oh, that high school is for such and such community, not ours. Immediately, we also see how the idea of community itself contributes to the ever-present challenge of vocabulary. Westerners typically mean neighborhood or something like that when speaking of community. In addition, when gospel communicators try to avoid unnecessary references to church, they often speak about the new community of God's people. Well, in view of the strong group orientation of Hindus, it may not be difficult to understand their perception then that following Christ implies leaving their own community and joining another foreign one. Before I chose a different topic for my Doctor of Ministry research, I had considered this one. The new community, competitor or complement? Hopefully someone else takes that up. Marriages traditionally are arranged along caste, subcaste lines. Each caste, or jati, each people group is either categorized into one of the 4 varnas of traditional Hindu society or actually is categorized outside of traditional Hindu society. For example, Dalits, the oppressed. The 4 varnas shown here are the traditional categories, the main categories within Aryan society. Some people tend to call these castes, and that's fine for general use, but they're actually varnas or colors, is the meaning of the word, one meaning. So the highest caste, known, of course, to most people as the priestly caste, the Brahmins. Then the Kshatriyas, the warriors, the rulers, Vaishyas, the merchants, the business people of society, and finally the lowest caste within the system of the four varnas, the Shudras, alternately spelled with the H or without the H because of the way Hindi and Sanskrit and other languages work. Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishya are called the three forward castes. The Shudras, of course, are the lowest and now called in modern parlance OBC, other backward classes within India. These are the laborers, the craftsmen of India. Outside of the Varna system, we find the famous or infamous, the unfortunate, the oppressed Dalits. Now that's the acceptable term, Dalit. Formerly, you would have heard the term outcasts, untouchables. Mahatma Gandhi coined the term Harijan, the people of God, the children of God. And these are now called the schedule castes for affirmative action, for reservations within government offices, jobs in government, in schools, in educational institutions, and so forth. Scheduled tribes also come outside of the system. No traditional Hindu identity exists for them. Animistic tribes in remote parts of the country have been outside of the historic development of Hinduism. And so they're outside of the Varna system. We need to be aware of the significant ethnic and caste differences within Hindu society as we pray and consider ways to approach these people to share the good news. Both the family's caste role in society, or the external family role, if you will, and an individual's role in that family, the internal family role, go a long way toward determining an individual's dharma, their duty, the way they should be in the world. Kasten Dharma. Traditionally, castes were defined by their prevailing vocations, each doing its part, its dharma, to keep the universe running orderly. Caste actually still often determines the work families do for a living, and therefore raising their children to do the same. The Chamar leather workers are among the Dalit people. Yadav milkmen, the Kewat boatmen, the Kumar potters, all other backward classes, the Shudras. Baniya, businessmen from the Vaishya Varna. Rajput landowners, very famous in India, from the Kshatriya caste. Not all Brahmins, finally, not all Brahmins are priests, but all priests are Brahmins. Social distance, a very important aspect of Hindu culture that we must never forget. Forward caste people never touch or eat with Dalits. Now that, of course, has changed over the decades, and it's happening less and less, but it is still a very real issue among the castes, among the people of Hindu culture. But generally, they don't touch, they don't eat with Dalits, believing they are spiritually impure. There are temples for Dalits, where only Dalits go and others would never set foot. It's a serious offense for Dalits to touch a forward caste person in many cases, or to invade their sacred space. The whole idea of eating, of sharing food. Food transmits pollution. Even for well-educated and wealthy Dalits, for some of them, their colleagues will not eat with them, even today. Roles and dharma within the family need to be taken into consideration. Each member of a family has a different dharma, different for son or daughter, especially significant for the firstborn, especially if it's a firstborn male. There are ceremonial roles for specific family members, and these roles cannot be replaced. They cannot be taken by others. A few examples: certain aunties, a mother's sister or a father's sister. They're critical for certain childhood ceremonies. The eldest son must preside at his father's funeral ceremony. Ashram Dharma for forward caste men. There are traditionally 4 stages of life. Ashramas, 4 ashramas. These are for traditional Hindu culture, society. The first is the student stage, brahmacharya. The second is grihastha, the householder stage. Most men are busy trying to provide for their family at this stage. And in terms of spirituality, they do the needful and they fulfill ceremonial obligations, but typically they conceive of serious spiritual pursuits to be for the latter stages of life. This fact remains one of the most significant challenges in Hindu ministry. Vanaprastha, retirement, we might say. Van is forest, so going into the forest, as it were, to be retired. Sannyas, the stage of renunciation, to leave everything. And some people take this literally even today. Very few, from my understanding, but they leave family, they leave the world as they know it, and they go off, renouncing everything to have their ultimate experience of seeking God. A woman's dharma is very important. The woman, she submits to the father, she submits to her husband, or more importantly, sometimes submitting to the father-in-law and the mother-in-law. She submits to the eldest son as the head of the patrilineal family after the husband dies. A lot of submission in mind for a woman in India. A woman is to fast numerous times a year. There are specific days, specific festivals for this in the Hindu calendar. She fasts for health and prosperity of her sons and her husband. She does puja, ceremonial worship on behalf of the family. A woman's dharma includes the passing on of religious knowledge. Another item regarding Hindu culture to keep in mind, very surprising to us when we first went to live among Hindu people, is the family grieving process. The entire family will not celebrate any holidays for 1 year after someone in the patrilineal family household dies. Dharma and karma. Of course, we've spoken a bit about karma before. Closely connected. The caste and family role that a person is born into, which determines their dharma in this present life, was determined by how well or how poorly they obeyed their dharma or fulfilled it in their past life. Life cycle rituals. In Hindi and some other North Indian languages, ceremony is samskar or sanskar. But some of these ceremonies are especially significant, and not to do them is unthinkable in terms of what it means to be part of a Hindu family. As part of the more in-depth training done by the company I work for, we describe 16 life cycle rituals. I'll mention some of those here. The naming ceremony. For girls, a ceremony for piercing of their ears. There's a ceremony for hair cutting at 1 year of age for all children. There's a ceremony for beginning one's education. There are numerous wedding activities and ceremonies taking place over several days, of course. And then the marriage ceremony itself with a fire and a priest. A ceremony upon death, the final ceremony, if you will, the cremation of the dead body. The next aspect or dimension of Hindu identity to be noted is faith and practice. What one's family has believed and practiced, perhaps passed down through generations, is determinative. Are they generally more into the philosophical side of things? Vedantism is sometimes used as a label for Hindu philosophy generally, though there are various systems besides Vedanta. Some would consider this high Hinduism. Cultural anthropologists, of course, talk about high religion and low religion or folk religion. You can see in the diagram we're depicting these additional aspects of Hindu identity formation. Or is this a more typical Hindu family, not so philosophical maybe, but focused on devotion to certain gods, members of the family performing ritual worship, briefly even each morning, before a small brass idol or painted image in a carefully arranged sacred space in their home? Is there evidence of superstitions as well? Certainly there are superstitious aspects of some of the life cycle rituals, the ceremonies mentioned earlier. That's true of many cultures of the world, of course. We'll talk a bit more about idolatry and superstition in another session. Hindu mothers are the first gurus for most Hindus. The spiritual faith and practice of most Hindus were instilled in them by their mothers or grandmothers, or by their parents and their family in general. But the family influence is unmistakable. This too, as most everything we've been talking about, has implications for loving our Hindu friends and sharing Christ. As we think about ministry among Hindu people, in Europe, we've had kids clubs. Some of you have done vacation Bible schools and so forth. Outreach to children in many parts of the world is common. But in the Hindu context, outreach to children, to young people, must somehow involve the whole family at some point. Any decisions, so-called, taken regarding considering another religious option or attending church or moving towards Jesus in some particular way, some obvious way, those decisions cannot be taken apart from consulting family members. And this is a very, very important thing to remember as we think about reaching out to Hindu people. Vedantism. The spiritual faith and practice of each Hindu family incorporates different amounts of Hindu religious philosophy. Some Hindu families are completely philosophical, it seems, even explicitly excluding idol worship. And often for these families, yoga and meditation are prominent practices. Most Westerners, we want to emphasize Indian philosophy to define Hinduism as a religion because it's a clear system of belief, what we are more accustomed to. But that's not nearly as definingly important to most Hindus. I studied some Indian philosophy during the completion of my engineering degree at university. When my wife and I first went to South Asia, I couldn't wait to meet all those Hindu men ready to engage in philosophical discussions. I didn't find very many. Many Vedantic concepts are widely understood, and many of the terms are used commonly among Hindus, even though philosophy does not play a major role in their faith and practice. And that's why I think it's important to do some basic reading in this area as well. Let me note here again, for Hindu people, religion is what you do, not what you believe. Do you attend the festivals? Do you chant the names of God? Do you light incense? Do you go to the temple occasionally at least? Do you engage in some kind of seva, some acts of service, acts of charity? Lastly, we want to think about this question. Is Hindu identity in crisis? One modern Hindu philosopher, also a president of India, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, declared Hinduism to be a way of life. By doing so, he made the point that it is not something separate from society and politics, separate from making money, sex, and love, separate from getting an education. And like other modern Hindus, he suggested that the closest term to be found within Indian thought and practice was Hindu Dharma, the law, order, truth, the duties of the Hindu people. That's what is said in Knott's book, a very brief introduction, a very short introduction to Hinduism. In traditional Hindu culture, there are 4 goals of life. Dharma, as we've spoken about. Dharma is pervasive within the Hindu identity, but it is only one of the 4 legitimate goals of life. Artha, wealth, prosperity, money. In the householder stage of life, it is not only right to pursue this, it is even part of a householder's dharma, his spiritual responsibility to his family, his ancestors, and his descendants. Kam, pleasure, love, desire, kam or kama. Not karma, but kam. In the householder stage of life, it is good and right to pursue this also. If you're going to have a family, you need to be involved in these things. And then finally, the ultimate goal of life, moksha, some people say moksha, salvation, liberation, the ultimate freedom from this endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. But materialism in an era of globalized consumerism poses threats to traditional Hindu identity that never really existed until the 20th century. Globalized consumerism is a vehicle of Western secularism and individualism that is eroding and replacing the collectivist identity and values of traditional cultures all over the world. Please listen. Secularization becomes more prevalent among affluent Hindu families the more they interact with globalized consumer culture. Again, Tim Schultz, writing in Disciple Making Among Hindus, says, modernity and secularization have influenced higher caste Hindu families significantly. The secularization of Hindu families should always be understood to be along a continuum from beginning to be secularized to very secularized, with the majority of non-traditional families falling somewhere in the middle. Many of these families live in and around the major cities, or even villages that have been impacted by the NRI, the non-resident Indian. The people who come and go every year bringing their dollars, their pounds, their euros, and their secularization with them into India. Secularization has affected the Hindu family in a unique way. Hindus who live in this type of family context intentionally seek to distance themselves from traditionalism because they have rejected the conservative Hindu orthodoxy of their elders. For them, traditional culture isolates and narrows people's lives. Perhaps the most significant change that secularization has brought is decentralization from a large extended family structure more to the nuclear family that allows for more individuality. But importantly, from the perspective of Hindu people, it is not secularization that threatens Hindu identity. It is individualism that threatens Hindu identity. This is important. Listen to Schultz again. If the secularized generations financially support their parents and come home from time to time, all will be well and the elders will be willing to overlook almost everything else. But if they fail to show up for festivals and other important occasions, or if they do not consider it necessary to support their parents, the larger family, this is interpreted as behavior that's an abandonment of Hindu values and an embracing of individualism. Individualism is seen as an offensive Western ideal, and it frequently causes painful conflict within traditional families. Don't you enjoy these colorful pictures? Hindu culture is event-oriented. Hindu people and their identities are formed from celebration of festivals, special events, and ceremonies, as we've talked about. Holi, the festival pictured here, along with many other festivals, are essential elements of Hindu culture. The history of evangelism among Hindu people, though, has involved much advising of new believers to avoid such festivals. The evangelist, the well-meaning, cross-cultural worker says, these things are Hindu, stay away, don't be with your family. And rather than getting into a long discussion about that in this context here, we just think more reflection needs to be given on what it really means for a young person from a Hindu family to say no regarding attendance at a festival or a special ceremony. Diwali, the Festival of Lights, the greatest festival celebrated in so many places of the world now. Much loved festival by Hindu people everywhere. It's hard to imagine what it would be like to try to explain to one's family why you cannot attend such a festival, such a great time of celebration. Again, the Hindu identity is almost infinitely flexible in matters of faith and practice. The core of the Hindu identity is the collectivism of the family. We need to be aware that the overwhelming majority of Hindu people have been impacted negatively by colonial rule, and they view Christianity as a foreign religion. We must not underestimate the lasting effects on a people who've been colonized and ruled for centuries. The Mughals, the Portuguese, Danish, and French, but of course, especially the British. And then later in the 20th century, even the Americans. If we think in terms of media, entertainment, dollars, lifestyle. Again, I encourage reading on the important subjects of colonialism and post-colonial theory. Even as parents have told their children, as we think about the family and we think about colonialism, if God wanted you to be a Christian, you would have been born in a Christian family. I don't think we can overestimate the impact of colonialism and Western imperialism.